Hello.
Hello, Sebastian.
Hello, Florian. Hello, Ben. Good morning.
Good morning.
So
I will mute myself and turn the camera off. Yeah, but I
Yeah.
will hear.
actually, I'll do the same for the next 2 minutes. Hello, Yela. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you, Sebastian?
Fine. Yourself?
Thank you. Everything is fine. Christiane will join a little bit later. She just has to work on some other issues, but in a few minutes she will join.
Okay.
Hello, Helen. How are you?
Good morning. Good morning, all.
morning, Helen.
Good morning. I can see your icons there. I'm not so familiar with Teams. Teams is a bit surprising.
Yeah, everybody has his favorites, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Maar als jij klaar bent, moet ik mijn beeld opzetten direct. Oké, goed.
Okay, so
Hello, Ben.
Good morning.
Good morning, Ben. And Florian is also in the call,
Yeah.
right?
So Christian Gulich told me he will be a bit late, so is Jean Berton. We should start.
Mhm.
Schön nach meinen grünen Zettel verändert. Ich muss den grünen Zettel jetzt richtig machen.
Okay. Ja, ich habe ihm ja schon gesagt, dass sie später kommt. Kein Problem.
Kann aber ein bisschen dauern. Cool.
Yes, I will. Okay, so let's wait for Ellen to come back.
And Jean, wasn't Jean also supposed to be there?
He will be joining at 10 only. He has,
Okay.
he has another meeting before.
Okay.
So shall we start?
Yeah, sure.
So thank you all for joining. We thought it would be important to have this session just to try to introduce the topic of the retail investment strategy in simpler terms than what you can read, especially in the commission papers and in my own papers. So as I mentioned, we're gonna organize 2 sessions, one this morning, one tomorrow morning. I hope all of you can join also tomorrow morning. In any case, this session and tomorrow's session will be recorded, so the video will be available for you to watch again if need be. There should also be a written transcript of it, that's more tedious to read, so I prefer video. So this morning, I'll start with a short introduction of the retail investment strategy, what it is concretely, in what political context it comes up, and concretely, what are the legislative proposals, what they amend in terms of EU legislation, before we actually, dive into the complexity of the topics themselves. So this morning, I want to talk about the probably the two most heated debate issues here in Brussels, which are the conflicts of interest part with the ban on inducements, partial ban on inducements, and the new value for money system, so the new rules on product oversight and governance and due cost and so on. So just in terms of practicalities, I may ask you to keep your microphones muted when you're not speaking. If you wish to intervene, you can always click the small hand icon, raise on top of the screen to show me that you want to take the floor. All this presentation and all the discussions we are going to have are intended for the members and the Better Finance team only. So please do not share it in details outside of your own organizations. Of course, you can share them with your colleagues. And finally, this webinar is recorded, mostly to facilitate our job in gathering your comments, your input, but also for you to watch again if you need, to check something, to have a refresher on the risk. So without further ado, what is the retail investment strategy? Some political context. The retail investment strategy is one of the initiatives of the European Commission in the broader context of the Capital Markets Union. Specifically, that's part of the key objective 2 of the Capital Markets Union, which is to make the EU an even, that's them saying, safer place for individuals to save and invest long term. So the idea of the Capital Markets Union is to create a large pan-European system of capital markets. There are parts that concerns really the industries, the central banks, the supervisors, and this key objective 2 is about retail investors. And in that key objective 2, we have 3 actions. Number 7, which is empowering citizens through financial literacy. We talk a lot of financial literacy these days. Action 8, building retail investors' trust in capital markets, and that's really where the retail investment strategy comes up. And finally, action 9, supporting people in their retirement. Of course, implicitly, retirement meaning save for your retirement income. Again, very important link to the retail investment strategy. So, in terms of context, the Capital Markets Union was really launched as a response to the sluggish economic growth after the global financial crisis, still is. We need investments in the European economy, in the green transition. So what policymakers are trying to do is redirect retail savers' money towards capital markets, towards equity in particular, but also bonds, away from bank savings accounts. For that, they need to make these capital markets attractive for retail investors, hence our retail investment strategy. Second element of context that you may have to bear in mind is that elections are coming up at the EU level. So EU officials, both the elected ones in the European Parliament, but also the the designated ones, the commissioners, are really concerned about their end of term, not mandate, end of term track record, sorry. And we have a lot of uncertainty about the next European Parliament. What we already know is that the extreme left and extreme right, which will be much stronger than they currently are. So the next European Parliament will be much more, populistic than the current one. Finally, this gives heated debates that are relayed inside the institutions. So on the retail investment strategy, we have a lot of debates, very heated, between consumer associations, us and some allies, and most of the industry, not all of it. And this is relayed inside the EU institutions. In the European Commission, we've seen that the Directorate General FISMA, which is in charge of the file of the retail investment strategy, pushed a lot for a ban on inducements, for more retail investor protection. And many of its proposals, unofficial proposals, were turned down by the College of Commissioners, so the top level decision body of the Commission. In the Council, so in the Council of Member State Governments, we have strong opposition between some pro-inducements, including them France, Germany, but also many others, and some anti-inducements like the Netherlands, because they already have a ban and they want to keep it that way. And many countries that still are undecided, that may accept some ban on inducements, that may accept some moves away from the status quo, but it should not be too disruptive. That's where we are treading light. Finally, in the European Parliament, the center right, so the EPP, the European People's Party, is very much supporting the status quo, very much relaying the arguments of the industry, while the left-wing part of the parliament are very much seeking increased investor protection. The Socialists and Democrats, for instance, are still pushing for full ban on inducements, even though the Commission, renounced, declined, tabling that proposal. Now, the proposals themselves. So it's a legislative package, which means that we have two legislative proposals. A proposal for a directive, which we named the omnibus proposal. An omnibus generally is a directive that amends a lot of other texts. And a proposal for regulation, the PRIPS proposal, amending only the existing PRIPS regulation, the one on the key information document. So this legislative package amends a lot of existing legislation. So the MiFID II directive, the markets in financial instruments, particularly the part on distribution of package retail investment products. The IDD, Insurance Distribution Directive, for the part on distribution of insurance-based investment products. The UCITS and IFMD directives, so the directives on the rules applicable to UCITS and to alternative investment funds. And finally, the PRIPS regulation, not finally actually, the PRIPS regulation on the key information document, which is changing a bit. We'll see that tomorrow. And that's more anecdotic, but also some changes on the Solvency II directives on insurance. Actually, the changes to Solvency II are limited to deleting some articles that are moved to IDD. I won't talk any more about Solvency II. Now, the proposed amendments relate to, first, conflicts of interest in investment advice. And those are parts that are focused on MiFID II and IDD, so the first two directives. Then we have amendments related to the information given to clients and prospective clients, including marketing information. What should be given in what format and at what time to prospective and existing clients. That amends MiFID II, IDD, and obviously the PRIPS regulation on the KID. And we have amendments on product oversight and governance that we will see today, and that affects a lot of existing legislation, MiFID II, IDD. but also UCITS and IFMD with a new product approval process and pricing process to identify and quantify all the costs and communicate it to distributors, to investors, to supervisors, and compare to benchmarks, and that's a big novelty. And finally, we have amendments on the qualifications of advisors that are included in MiFID II for investment firms, or advisors in investment firms, and in IDD for insurance intermediaries. Are there preliminary questions so far, or are you still following me? Yeah. Good. Okay, so conflicts of interest. Basically, about two parts in this conflicts of interest section of the risk, or aspect of the risk, which are the new inducements regime, so the new rules on whether you can take or not take inducements, and the so-called best interest of the client test. So I will start with the new inducements regime, which is a bit complex, so bear with me, and follow up with the best interest of the client test, a bit simpler. So the new inducements regime. So here in this table, I compare, MiFID II and IDD. So MiFID II, remember, those are funds products. IDD is insurance-based investment products. So we have already in MiFID II a ban on inducements for portfolio management services offered by investment firms. We hope to have it also extended to portfolio management services done by insurance intermediaries. This is not part of the proposal. Come back to that. We have a new ban on inducements, the same for both MiFID and IDD, on sales without provision of investment advice. So where you buy a product and say what product you want and do not take any advice, or the advisor doesn't advise you, then inducements will be forbidden. Then we have already in MiFID existing, that you may know already about, but new to IDD, a ban on inducements for sales where the advice is given on an independent basis, so what we call independent advisors. Actually, it's the advice that is independent, not the advisor. So that's already existing in MiFID, and it's extended pretty much in the same terms for insurance intermediaries, which is good news. And finally, I will just mention it, but you may have already read it in the press, that inducements will remain allowed for all other sales. So all sales with investment advice given on a non-independent basis, which sometimes here at Better Finance refer to as conflicted advice or biased advice. Yeah. So a bit more into detail, starting with the portfolio management issue. So portfolio management is actually not a term that is used by insurance companies, by insurance intermediaries. They often talk about delegated management, mandated management. There are other names also, but the notion of portfolio management is not defined in EU law for insurance. So in that context, there is no advice, there is a mandate given by the client to the insurance intermediary to select the right products in exchange for a fee. So this service is remunerated. What we ask the Commission and the MEPs who are opposed to this ban on inducements is that if there are no inducements allowed for investment firms offering portfolio management in MiFID, that's already in place, why is it okay for insurance intermediaries to actually receive inducements for the same service? So our proposal is actually to introduce in the insurance distribution directive, the IDD, an equivalent of the MiFID provisions that define portfolio management, because we need a definition in IDD of portfolio management, and also add the prohibition to pay or receive inducements when providing that service for insurance intermediaries. We don't need any, suggest any amendments to MiFID on that account because it's already in place, it's already working. And as far as I know, nobody in the asset management industry is actually questioning it. So, first question I have for you is this an issue in your respective countries? Is portfolio management by insurance intermediaries, by insurance companies, a thing in your countries? We know it's in France, but we actually don't have much data on how important it is in other countries. So I would like to hear it from you. Have you ever heard anything like that? And second question, would you agree with our proposal to extend to insurance intermediaries the ban on inducements for portfolio management? So I open the floor for reactions, responses. Who wants to start? Yes, Yela.
Yeah. Thank you, Sebastian. First of all, I would like to say thank you very much for this great idea to have these workshops, because I think it's the first time that Better Finance does something like that. And as you know, answering 49 pages of a questionnaire is difficult for all of us. So we're very happy that you prepared everything so well, especially the presentation of today, which really helps. And when we start with these first questions, I actually feel that I'm not as competent because life insurance is not really my major competence. So probably Jean Berton and Christian Gülich are the experts there. I know it's a big issue in France, but I'm not as sure about Germany because portfolio management services is in the German system more on the bank side and not as much on the insurance or life insurance side. And to the second question, yes, I'm a fan and a strong supporter of a level playing field. So yes, I think we should have the same rules on both sides. So yes, I agree that we should extend the proposal also to insurance intermediaries regarding the ban on inducements for portfolio management. But that's my personal view.
Okay. Anyone else? Mark?
Can I just ask just for my clarification, what an inducement on portfolio management looks like? Who's being induced how? I mean, obviously the portfolio manager is receiving a fee for managing the portfolio, and that's non-contentious. What is the issue that is being addressed first in the traditional asset management market?
Okay, so maybe I should have started with that actually. What we refer to as inducements in this particular EU level debate is really third-party payments, so payments by manufacturers of products to the distributors, to the intermediary, the advisor. So in portfolio management, the idea when the ban on inducements for portfolio management services in MiFID was introduced is that since the client is already paying for the service, the advisor for the service of selecting products, the advisor should not be also paid by the manufacturer to select their products. The problem that there is here is a problem of conflict of interest, because if the advisor, instead of selecting the best products for his client, selects the best products for its own, end of the month income, then it's likely that it will select products that are either, that have either lower yields or are not adapted to the needs of the consumer. So that was a reason why it was decided to get rid of inducements in that part.
Thank you. I would just make a comment that certainly in the UK, yes, I mean first of all, that has disappeared in terms of a back payment from a portfolio manager to an advisor for selecting. The insurance industry has more of a sort of sales concept rather than an advisory concept, perhaps, and so they regard them as being a cost of delivery. But in the traditional asset management market, what we are seeing is networks, sometimes even compliance networks, that sit over the top of advisors that effectively charge for access to the network. There's a pay-to-play concept, and that is, to my mind, an inducement. But it appears to happen underneath the regulation without triggering any response.
Okay. That's something I've never heard about, but I wonder whether other countries in Europe have the same kind of system, and that's definitely something we should raise. Could you maybe send me something about?
I will have to get my thoughts together, but I'll send you a brief summary and a specific example.
Yeah, thank you very much. So Ben, I saw you raise your hand.
No, just because you said you didn't hear about it, but for instance, in the Dutch area, there's something called NNEK. So advisors are sort of licensees of this platform, and then the platform decides which products are available on the platform. I know this exists in One Life, and One Life is more Europe-wide. So in order to have access to certain products, you need to be a recognized advisor, and there is a certain cost affiliated, and that cost, whichever way you look at it, is going to be earned back by the selection of the products.
Okay.
So it's not an inducement direct, and that's why it escapes the regulation, but somebody pays.
Yeah, I see. Thanks.
And I would reiterate Jela's concept that yes, consistency of regulation would seem to be a positive.
Actually, that's we raised this issue with the Commission, the absence of this particular ban on portfolio management services, and what they told Guillaume in pretty much pretty honest terms is that they simply overlooked it. They had no idea. So it's really an omission on their part.
Then it should be fixed.
And if you can step back, you said in the beginning of this section, maybe we should try to identify what exactly portfolio management is. And therein lies another problem, because of course there's active management whereby they do something to earn their money, but more and more you see products being fairly passive. We have private banks that have 4 funds, and any client is going to be just a distribution over their 4 funds, or it just goes into zero bonds, or it goes into ETFs. How much compensation is acceptable for something they call portfolio management, which really isn't? I don't know if that's part of this proposal, but it's something we might look at in the future.
Yeah, the point is that whatever the level of compensation for the portfolio management, it should be a mandate fee or a portfolio management fee, and not an inducement. It's clarifying and separating the different sources of income and fees, so that we actually know who pays what, and it's clear for everybody. And hopefully at the end.
And this is also, I just wanted to underline that, Sebastian, it's all for the investors' side. It's just a matter of transparency. I think that's the main issue. We, as an investor, have to see immediately what the costs are, and that's why transparency is the key issue.
Yeah, exactly. Mark, you wanted to add something?
Yes, just a sort of unintended consequences comment, and I pick up on what Jela has said about transparency. Transparency is fantastic and to be encouraged, but the way that the law has gone around transparency is actually forcing the cash flows to go in forced directions. So it's not sufficient for the investor to see who is being paid what. They're insisting that the investor directly pays, and the concern that I have is around research and the unintended consequences we have seen on small company research. To the extent that now that the UK is outside the EU, they are actively looking to reverse the law on non-subsidy of research, and that's probably a positive because individual investors have suffered. So the cost of transparency has been lack of access to research, and that's been a poor unintended outcome.
Yeah. So on that, I know there are there is some movement in terms of research which is part of the Listing Act. I'm not following particularly that topic, so that's my colleague Martin, but I will flag it, to circulate information on what's going on there.
Maybe just one comment, Sebastian, on Mark, and it is part of the Listing Act actually, as it is proposed now. So also the EU Commission recognized that this is going in the wrong direction because the research for the small companies is still needed. So I think that will change in the future.
But my comment is really that I think there's a point of principle here, which is that it's not necessarily always the case that better transparency, particularly where that forces direct payments, works. So I think one has to have that in mind when you're looking at you have to look at the context of each advance rather than just simply saying transparency at all costs.
Mm-hmm. So just on that, the new inducement regime that is proposed by Jean is joining us. So the new inducement regime is actually also foreseeing an exemption for small amounts of third-party payments, in particular for research. I don't exactly have the wording in mind, but there is a small exemption foreseen for that. So we may look into that, especially in relation to what's going on with the Listing Act. Hello, Jean.
Hello. Bonjour.
Thanks for joining us. So, Hélène. Okay, so we were actually talking about portfolio management in life insurance. I was explaining that you may already have discussed, with Guillaume, the importance of portfolio management services in life insurance, especially in France, and the fact that the proposal for the retail investment strategy does not foresee any extension of the ban on inducements for portfolio management to life insurers. And I was asking the other participants whether it's a problem in other countries and whether they would agree to extend to us making a proposal to extend the ban on inducements to IDD.
Okay.
Do you have any thoughts on that you may want to share with us from the French perspective?
Not specifically. No, it's okay. I will support the Better Finance proposal, no problem.
Okay. Hello, Christiana.
Hello, good morning, everyone, and apologies for being late.
Hi, Christian.
No problem. We started with the new inducements regime and just starting with the first point on portfolio management services.
Perfect.
Just for Jean and for Christiana, this is recorded, so you can watch again the that you missed later on.
We have it. Thank you.
Okay, so second part of the inducements regime, if we are done with the portfolio management part, is the infamous execution only or unadvised sales ban on inducements. So the idea of the Commission, and that we I think fully share, is that if there is no advice, there should not be any remuneration for advice. So the whole argument for inducements falls away. What is tricky in this concept is that what we call execution only exists really in MiFID, and the term execution only does not appear in the proposal. what is said is that inducements are banned for the services of reception and transmission of orders or execution of orders. In that case, there is no suitability assessment, and you can't take any inducement. The same ban for IDD is slightly different. Here, unadvised sales, or sales without advice, are sales of insurance-based investment products with a suitability assessment, which is simply not covering the client's current financial situation or investment objectives and needs. But the rest of the suitability assessments, the questions about, all the rest, knowledge, needs for insurance covers, and so on, has to be there. That's mandatory. You have to make it, even in a sale that is without advice. So in both cases, what is not there is a personal recommendation on the investment dimension of the product. If you take away the investment dimension of the advice in MiFID, there is simply nothing, no suitability assessment. But take away the investment dimension of a sale of EBIP, you still have to advise on the insurance cover and the biometric risk and so on. Hence the difference, and also the problematic aspect of actually saying it's a ban on execution-only sales, and all the insurers are up in arms telling you the execution-only doesn't exist in insurance. So we have issues with IDD, with the proposal for IDD. The first one is that we have already in the IDD directive a problematic definition of advice as a personal recommendation to the client, but no distinction between advice on the insurance cover and advice on the investment dimension of the product. Advice is generally defined. Now, the proposals, when you read it very attentively, you understand that what they mean by sales without advice is, as I said, a sales without advice on investment. So, all right, I'm going to show everything. So what we're proposing is to clarify the definition of investment advice. You say what is, what part of the suitability assessment corresponds to advice on investments, and that if you don't give that as an insurance intermediary, then you can't take inducements. That would be to clarify the scope of the ban for everybody. Second issue we have is that the proposal actually foresees an option for member states to make the provision of advice mandatory for all or some sales of insurance-based investment products. So if you take a partial ban on inducements applying to sales without advice, but you allow a government to make advice mandatory, then you don't have any sales without advice, so there is no ban. Hence, what we would like to propose is actually to limit that option for member states and saying that they can make the advice on the cover, on the insurance cover, on the biometric risk mandatory, but they can't make investment advice mandatory. Otherwise, there is no point having a ban on inducements for those. So, again, my questions. Do you agree with the proposal for clarification in IDD, so separating, integrating a sub-definition of investment advice, aside from the classic advice definition? And should member state be forbidden to make the provision of investment advice?
On the first point, is it realistic to make a distinction between sales of EBIPs and investment advice? When somebody wants to to invest in an EBIP, he certainly makes an investment, but he's also buying a product that will give him some insurance cover. And that's the reason why the costs are different from EBIPs and from direct sales of the unit trust inside the EBIPs, for example. So just wondering whether we can ask for a separation between the two. I don't see how you can sell an EBIP without selling both characteristics of the EBIP, which is insurance cover and investment in products.
That's actually
that's my point. So I mean, we can ask for a clarification, but doesn't mean necessarily that this clarification will separate the two kind of sale.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree, and that's probably why for life insurers it's actually very difficult to understand this proposal for a ban on unadvised sales. That for now, literally, it would mean a client coming in the office or connecting to an app and saying, I want to buy a life insurance or any other EBIP, and in that I want that specific investment fund, I want that specific ETF, but advise me on the insurance cover, on the guarantees. For now, to my knowledge, that may exist, but that's very not spread. I think the Commission is really thinking in abstract terms, and why couldn't it exist? It could, theoretically. It just still doesn't, because there was no use case. But if the legal possibility exists, then we may see market players developing something like that, saying platforms that allow you to say what fund you want to invest in, and then say, do you want to add an insurance guarantee around that?
Yeah, then, exactly.
And so then I think this clarification we propose is just a way to make the legal distinction clearer for anyone wanting to build on that framework, and also make clear to everyone what is a sale with advice and a sale without advice, because for now it's really not clear. I spent, I think, 2 days understanding that part of the proposal, so I realize it might be really tricky.
No, I don't see the possibility to make a sale without advice in EBIPs. That's my point.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's always, or quite always, is linked with an advice, but maybe I'm wrong.
So the part that is mandatory in any case is the suitability assessment on, don't exactly remember items, but when the proposal refers to sales without advice, it's sales without with a suitability assessment that does not cover the information about the client's current financial situation and existing portfolios, for instance, and it does not cover their investment objectives and needs. So as an insurance advisor, you do the classic advice, except asking questions about what investment product do you already have, and why do you want to invest, basically.
No, but okay, but in that case, that means that the seller is only acting as making reception and transmission of order. He just executes the wish of the will of the clients to invest in an EBIP. That's point. So I'm just considering that it's not. I mean, it certainly has to be precise in in the regulation, but I must say that it could be very dangerous because it's different when you make in MiFID, when you receive and transmit an order, or when you execute an order, you have one responsibility, which is in any case to choose the best track or the best intermediary to execute, to finally execute the order. But it's clear that the order is buy or sell this kind of share, or this kind of, maybe in some cases, this kind of unit trust. But it's different in EBIPS because of that insurance cover, because of that the insurance part of the product.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And also because when you invest in an EBIP, you give you the possibility to invest in a lot of different investment products, but you not necessarily go directly to invest in an investment product. It's that the problem of is it an alternative between investing in an EBIP or investing directly in a unit trust or in a share? I'm not quite sure it's an alternative, because investing in an EBIP is very something specific,
Mm-hmm.
which is different from investing directly in a unit trust.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there is
my point.
Really, I think
not sure that it is completely in agreement with Guillaume's position, but that's my position.
Thank you. Yeah, I think actually when the Commission cooked up this proposal for ban on inducements for execution only, they really had MiFID in mind, much more than IDD. You have to know that here in Brussels, most people know about MiFID. Very few people know really the ins and outs of IDD. And when they think about this ban on inducements, they always think MiFID. That probably is the case for the Commission too, and so that there are some issues that are still unresolved and need to be thought through. So what?
On the second point, Sébastien, I don't understand why you would forbid the member states to make the provision of investment advice mandatory for EBIPs.
So because we find that if a member state can make the provision of advice mandatory, then it defeats the purpose of the proposed ban on inducements for unadvised sales. It's just a question of, it's illogical to say
no, because if you make investment advice mandatory, that is that you are not execution only or unadvised sales, that you are in another position. That means that in that member state there will be never execution only or unadvised sales for EBIPs. That's all.
Exactly.
And why not?
But Jean, do we want that, or do we want more competition, also for execution only? Just a question.
No, but it doesn't change the competition. You can have competition in investment advice and competition in execution only.
But then, if we allow that option and say the French government decide to require that any sale of any EBIP comes with investment advice, then there is no possibility for any market player to develop a service of sales without advice, even though we don't exactly know what it looks like at the moment.
Yeah, but we have to defend the interest of the savers, and if you give the possibility to sell without advice a product that is so specific and so difficult to understand than an EBIP, then are you really acting to protect the interest of the savers, of the potential buyers, or are you more in the position of saying, okay, I don't want any inducement, and that's the reason why I will allow people to make sales without inducement.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I see what you mean. And from my understanding is that the most complex part of an EBIP is the, related to the insurance wrapper around the investment itself.
Yeah.
And the without advice only relates to that, investment unit part in the center. So our proposal would be to just for member states to make the provision of advice on the insurance wrapper as mandatory as you want, and it already is, in any case, but don't make the advice on the investment.
Okay, I understand. That means that when a member state can say, okay, I want a mandatory advice for the insurance cover inside the EBIP, but I will not make a mandatory advice for the investment in the underlying products. In that case, that means that the sale of the EBIP could not be execution only or an advice, because there will be in any case an advice on the insurance part of the product.
Yeah, but actually what the proposal means, unadvised, is just without advice on the investment. So in any case, even in a sale without advice, I quote, without advice, advice on the insurance wrapper remains mandatory. Okay. So that's where, this vocable of without advice is really...
So there is no ban on inducement in that case when we sell an EBIP?
There is a ban on inducement if you don't advise on the investment.
So there is no inducement when you advise on these?
No inducement if you don't...
Because you will have to advise on the insurance cover of the characteristics of the EBIP.
Yes. That
could bring a possibility to have an inducement.
So if you give advice on the insurance cover, on the wrapper, but not on the choice of investment vehicle, so in investment funds, etc., then you don't take inducement. If you give advice on the insurance wrapper and the investment vehicles, then you can take inducement. You can.
So, okay, no problem. If the majority of the people think that it's the good way to do it, I will certainly not go against. But just to conclude, it seems to me that you're starting for a point, which is I want to have a ban on inducement, whatever happens. And so I'm trying to find all the possibility to have a ban on inducement. Okay, that's all. But I mean, it's a little bit excessive.
Okay.
In my view, but that's all. Ask the other ones what they want exactly.
So all that's noted, and I will integrate it. Any other reactions? No?
No.
Okay, maybe after we move to the third part of the proposal on inducements. Besides the proposal to ban inducements for execution only on unadvised sales, the proposal specifically for IDD also extends the ban on inducements when the investment advice is given on an independent basis. What is often referred to for MiFID as, independent advisor status. Actually, not the status of independent advisor. It's when the advisor tells you that they give their advice independently on an independent basis, then they can't take inducement. So
logic.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So the advisors in the new system for IDD are required, first of all, first thing, to inform you whether the advice is provided on an independent basis or not. If they are not giving you independent advice, we have to tell you. If the advice is independent, then the advisor should first, excuse me, I was closing the window. I live near a school, so so they should assess a sufficiently large number of products available, which are sufficiently diversified and not limited to entities having close links with the advisor. So that's really the wording of the proposal, which also makes sense. If they are independent, they have to assess a broad range of products from different providers, not one specific. And that's where the ban on inducement comes in. They should not accept and retain any fees or commissions paid by any third party. Again, with some small exceptions for research and things that are absolutely necessary for the products to work. But the main idea is that if you are giving independent advice, well, you don't take inducements.
Yeah.
You can receive them, but then you have to pass them on to the client.
Mhm.
So it doesn't limit you in terms of what range of products you may recommend, because you can still recommend products that do pay inducements, just you have to pass them on to the client.
Yeah.
In our analysis, we see the uncertainty of the proposed rules in terms of what number is sufficiently large, what degree of diversification is sufficient, and what kind of links should be considered close. So, of course, it's difficult to imagine a directive that would specifically tell you, how many products you have to assess and how many providers, but some guidelines would probably be useful to have. I see you, Christian. I just finished this part and then I open the floor. So in terms of the entities having close links, the proposal for MiFID is actually a bit more developed. It also mentioned, close links, such as close legal or economic relationships, such as contractual relationships, as to pose a risk of impairing the independent basis of the advice provided. That's still a bit vague, but a bit more developed, and the more developed, the more basis you have for oversight and control. And so questions for you. Could we suggest more specific criteria for the advice given on an independent basis? Could we? What kind of guidance? And should the proposed close links criterion in IDD be refined to match the MiFID version? Again, with coherence of the two legislation. And on that, Christiane?
Thank you, Sebastian. My first question has already been answered. The MiFID version is more developed, obviously. My understanding is that even under MiFID, the independent advice is not sufficiently clear because it leaves a bit of leeway still in that regard. What I am wondering is if we should really try to get a harmonized approach both in IDD and MiFID. I understand the retail investment strategy is a horizontal proposal, so should we try to get as close as possible definitions aligned in both regulations or both directives? Meaning that I would go for your second proposal, match IDD to MiFID. but then make clear that even in MiFID, the definitions are not sufficiently clear and need to become more developed or should become clarified.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I fully agree. If we suggest, a more defined or refined criteria for IDD, we would suggest the same for MiFID. Basically, make one text applicable for both. The idea being that an independent advisor is the same, basically the same, whether they work for an investment firm or an insurance intermediary. They have to comply with the same things.
Yeah, because we are going more and more to this product view, and for the investor, if he comes to an advisor, he may be offered an EBIP, he may be offered an investment product, he may be offered, I don't know, savings account, whatever, but he doesn't know about MiFID and IDD. So from the investor's point of view or from the saver's point of view, it should be regardless of in which product he wants to invest.
Yeah, I would even go further, and that's a point that we've mentioned a couple of times here in Brussels, but it's actually might be not enough to just look at MiFID and IDD, but we also should look at crypto in that regard and try to apply the same rules. The proposal we have is just MiFID and IDD, but definitely we have to have something consistent, because, as you said, people just don't know what the difference is, and they are offered by the same persons, the same people, the same kind of products, or no, the two kinds of products. So they should have similar and as close as possible requirements to comply with.
I will agree on the fact that we should have a common definition of what is an independent advisor, and that it should be in the directive. So I have no problem with that, except that have you any suggestions to be more precise than we are in the MiFID version? What kind exactly of things do you want to say concerning the number or concerning the diversification? It seems.
I don't know, because in my view, sufficiently large and sufficiently diversified depends really on the size of the universe of products that are theoretically possible to recommend, and that really depends on the situation of the client. If your client have a very specific situation with very specific needs, there might be only a very few products available in any case. So if you say, they need to look at least 10 providers, but there are only 9, what is the advisor supposed to do? Maybe we can, ask, to put in the directive a mandate to ESMA and EIOPA to develop guidelines on, what to refine that. But for us to suggest thresholds and numbers, it's, I think, very difficult.
Okay.
I'm very supportive of this idea, Sebastian, because we should not put too much into the regulation, but it should be up to the guidelines to give these precise definitions.
Okay,
that's good.
Good. Any other reaction on that point? Okay. So, second part of the advice given on an independent basis is a new proposal for both MiFID and for IDD regulated advisors to, the proposal introduces this possibility to give limited advice. The idea for the Commission, and for me it's really half-baked idea that they put in at the last minute, is to give something to kind of level the playing field between independent advisors and non-independent by giving them a system that limits the cost of advice for most of the clients. So problem is, if you read the way it's written in MiFID and in IDD, it's very different. It's a bit different. So in MiFID, the system is that if you give independent advice and you restrict your recommendation to, quote, well-diversified, non-complex, and cost-efficient products, then you don't need to collect information about the client's knowledge and experience of the investment fields or their existing portfolio. So the result is that if you give independent advice and limit the range of products you assess, then you can do a sort of light suitability assessment.
Excuse me, is it already in the MiFID
It's new.
directive, or is
No,
it new?
It's new.
Ah, okay, sorry.
In that slide, everything's new.
Okay.
So basically, that would reduce the cost of advice because you have less questions to ask and less assessment to make before making the recommendation. But in IDD, the system is if you give independent advice and you have informed the customer about the possibility and the conditions to get access to standard independent advice, then you can limit your assessment to well-diversified, cost-efficient, and non-complex EBIPs. So in IDD, in the version for IDD, there is no light suitability assessment. There's just a reduced range of products to assess. But the information to be collected is the same. And the assessment has to be the same. Just you don't go for the complex, potentially less diversified EBIPs. And you have a safeguard that is, you have to inform the customer that you will restrict your analysis to those simple products.
What is the reason for the difference?
Yeah.
Absolutely no idea. Sorry for that. My understanding is actually what I present you here is my reconstruction of the rule, but the way it's written, I think the difference comes from the difference in structure of MiFID and IDD. They put that, they plugged that into existing articles, and that they probably didn't really compare what they did in both. Yeah. The expert for IDD wrote a version of what he thought like limited advice. If it did the MiFID version. And they probably
shouldn't we oppose such a new category of limited advice? I mean, I'm not a fan of creating new categories which are not very clear, and have a light suitability assessment, which sounds kind of strange for me. Either you give advice or you don't give advice. It's a bit like, being a little bit pregnant or not at all. I mean, I don't really understand it, and I think it should be consistent again between the two, IDD and MiFID.
Yes, I agree completely with you. I think this idea of limited advice is something that's come from the, I don't know, from maybe from the industry, but it's not a good point. And there is advice or there is no advice, a point. And limited doesn't mean nothing. And as you said on your slide, in any case, we'll have to define for the another point that we will discuss later, what is cost efficient, and so it's not possible to support these two proposals from the Commission, in my view. I
totally agree, especially as in the MiFID part. It doesn't make sense. You get independent advice and the recommendation is restricted to well-diversified, complex and cost-efficient products. So, but the knowledge of the investor is key if you want to introduce a lighter regime, in my view. So it doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Maybe
in any case, it's suitable or it's not suitable, but you cannot be, I'm like suitable. No, it doesn't mean nothing.
Yeah. Honestly, my preference goes to the IDD version. I think indeed you have to ask all the questions. Then the idea, I think, from the commission, for the Commission here, is to tell that for many people, actually, there will be a simple product that fits the bill. You know, when you have the information and you can just start by looking at the simple, well-diversified products, and you will find one. And that limits the cost for the advisor. And then if you don't find one, then you would move to the full assessment. But, you know, it's really, as I said, for me, really something last minute that was added in there, and I'm not sure they've thought through all the consequences. And, you know, definitely we have the problem of that difference between MiFID and IDD that needs to be solved.
No, but in any case, the concept in itself of light suitability it's not a good one, and we should refuse to support this kind of things. We should say no, we are not. We are against that.
Yeah, and in the IDD version, so there is no light suitability assessment. It's just a more limited range of products that is assessed against the information. Would that be better?
No, not in my view. It complex.
No,
it makes everything more complex.
Yeah, exactly.
Why would we need this? I don't see the point why we would introduce, or so for MiFID, no, in any case, but also for IDD, but maybe I haven't really understood. I don't see the need for it to limit costs for distributors, or what is the reason behind?
I think the only reason is to give a comparative advantage to independent advisors. And that's, you know, a bone that the Commission is throwing them, you know, in compensation for not proposing a full ban on inducement. But I actually see less problems with the IDD version because, you know, you still take all the information, you make a full assessment of each product against this information. Just you start with looking at a more limited sample of products, and if there is not enough, you know, if none of those products
yeah, but that makes it first more difficult for the investors. So first I go to the independent advisor, get this restricted assessment, and then I have the opinion it's not what I am interested in, then I have to go again to another advisor who gives me the full advice, the standard independent advice. Doesn't make sense.
Or, well, since in the IDD version you would not have to answer any additional questions, it's just the advisor needed to assess more products. He would not necessarily have to contact you to ask you for more questions. There would be a difference in terms of the fee, of course, and then they would have to tell you. In the MiFID version, if I see that working in practice, it would be you start with a small questionnaire, and then if the light suitability assessment doesn't fit, then they would call you back to ask you more questions. It's really thought exercise at this point. But Ellen, I see you have your hand raised for some time, so go ahead.
Thank you, Sebastian. Yes, it's not showing on my display for some reason, so I can't tell what status the hand is. But I just wanted to lend support and say I think it's a semantic minefield to have this light assessment, and it does place a massive burden on the guidelines, which suggesting that the drafting of the guidelines would be just as important as the actual directive itself, and then transposing it into individual member state law would seem to be equally a minefield. But more generally, my question underlying all of this is to what extent the Commission has done an impact study to assess whether sales would be actually promoted in the way that is intended, and whether costs would come down. I mean, it seems that there are so many variables, and I just wondered if you could at some point let us know whether there is already an impact assessment. Thank you.
So the impact assessment actually was based on a proposal for a full ban.
Right.
And this specific issue of limited advice was definitely not part of the scenarios that were contemplated. That's also why I think it's really something that they added last minute as a political compromise inside the Commission. So we have no idea whether this would be actually useful in terms of boosting sales by independent advisors or not, or what it would mean in terms of costs of advice. There is no data on that.
This means that you have three categories. You have an independent advisor that will limit assessments to well-diversified, cost-efficient, and non-complex EBIP, and with low fees. You have an independent advisor which will be not limited to well-diversified, cost-efficient, and non-complex EBIPs, but will will work on a set of EBIPs which is larger, and the cost will be higher. And then you have no independent advisor. I don't know how the saver or the customer will really understand what happened between all those categories. So I think it's
so add to
it's
that
too much.
The same person, the same advisor can be the three categories at the same time.
Oh,
not
that's
at the same time.
awful.
So
if it's really that, and that's then we still...
you can think of an advisor telling you, so okay, by default my solution is that I take inducements so you don't pay for your advice. Do you have a problem with that? Yes or no? If you say yes, then they can tell you, then I will give you independent advice, don't take inducements. And in that case, I have to inform you that I will limit my assessment to well-diversified, non-complex, and cost-efficient products. Or do you want me to look at all products, but you will pay more? So, bunch of questions to be asked before you actually start answering the rest.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, I understand. When you take the second case, I limit my assessments to well-diversified, cost-efficient, and non-complex EBIPs. What happens if this does not cover the requirement of the customer? What happens if those set of EBIPs are not suitable for the customer? Then you have to go to the third possibility, that is that I will look at all the population of EBIPs.
Yes.
And then you will pay more. So why do you have to say that? So then, how can I say that? And you are the customer. You have a specific problem that you want to resolve. And you go to your advisor. Your advisor says you have two possibilities. Either low cost and I restrict myself to certain categories of EBIPs, or higher cost and I will cover all categories of EBIPs. And you say in advance, you will say, I want the one or the second one, the first one or the second one. But then in that case, it could happen that your requirements are not suitable with the investment population, with the population of EBIPs that is proposed to you. So what do? You say, I will take independent advice restricted, and then the advisor come back and say, okay, I make my study, I look at your requirement, and I just discover that it doesn't work. So who will be paid? Who will be paid for that? How the advisors will be paid? Because then in that case, the customer say, okay, but I don't want to have a higher cost, so I refuse to pay for the other study.
Well, so I mean, if after the assessment limited you as a customer just don't refuse for the advisor to switch to traditional advice.
Yeah. Or
Without-
no, not to independent advice, but on a larger population.
Yeah. Then if you,
What happened?
I guess the relationship would stop there, but the client would still have to pay for the work that has been done to the advice, even if there is no product available.
Maybe. Yeah.
Honestly, I think there is a whole set of developed to be developed for that, because for now the proposal is really short and does not include any of the practicalities of how it would work. But definitely that's something we need to point out, that it has to be developed. How should firm handle that if that happens?
But honestly, why do you want to support these possibilities, this new possibility offered in IDD?
No, honestly,
what is your reason?
Honestly, for now, we really don't have any orientation on that. We're really asking you because
then in that case, you can say we don't want that without having more precise details of what you mean, what you want to do.
Yeah, sure.
And there is another point, which is the independent advisor status. I think, and that come back to these points before, maybe it could be interesting to propose that the independent advisor status be given to somebody by the supervisory authorities, and that if you are independent, you cannot, you are restricted to work only on independent advice, and you cannot make recommendation on non-independent advice, as you said just before. So I mean, I would be surprised if somebody is called himself independent and he say, okay, I can make independent advice for you if you want, but I can do also non-independent advice if you prefer.
Yeah, that's
should not be possible. I think if you are independent, you are independent. You cannot be something else.
Yeah, I think that's probably the thing that is clear for all customers. Either they go to an independent advisor or they go to something that is not independent, tied agent, branch, or non-independent advisor. But definitely this idea that it's theoretical that you could be both, or that you could do both, but legally it's possible in the current text, and that's problematic. I agree.
Yeah, it's very problematic.
Any other reaction? Okay, I'm very glad that we are recording this, because I will have my notes then.
Yeah, it will be difficult, maybe.
Okay. So finally, just to wrap up, but that's something that doesn't change very much. When the advice is given on a non-independent basis, so the conflicted advice, biased advice by non-independent advisors. So first, the advisor has to inform the client that the advice is not given on an independent basis. That's a bit of a novelty for both MiFID and IDD. Paying or receiving inducements remain allowed, traditional sense. And the only condition is to comply with the duty to act in the best interest of the client. And that's where the novelty comes in. There is a new operationalization of this best interest of the client with what has been dubbed by the proposal the best interest of the client test, which replaces the quality enhancement test that is currently in MiFID and the no detriment test in IDD. And the idea is to have the same requirements for non-independent advisors, whether regardless of what product they sell, PRIIPs or EBIPs. So
EBIPs are part of PRIIPs.
Yeah, PRIPS with one I.
Okay.
Package retail investment products.
Mm.
Yeah, but PRIPS, yeah. Sorry, I should not use the term PRIPS because it's always difficult to speak. So the best interest of client test is the list of criteria of requirements that I've shown in the table. For MiFID, it's only A to C. For IDD, there is a fourth one about the insurance cover.
No.
Makes sense. So the first, investment firms or insurance intermediaries providing advice on retail investment products or EBIPs to retail clients must A, base their advice on an appropriate range of products. Same issue, we don't really know what an appropriate range is. B, recommend the most cost-efficient products among those found suitable to the client. Other issue, what does cost-efficient mean? We argue that it's the one with the lowest cost for the services asked by the client, not necessarily the cheapest product. And then include in their recommendation at least one product, and that's where it's a bit hazy and complex, without any additional features that are not necessary to the achievement of the client's investment objectives and that gives rise to extra costs. So our understanding, and we spoke to different organizations about that to really try to understand what they meant, is that in their recommendation, non-independent advisors have to include at least one product, the features of which are really limited to what has been asked or is really necessary to meet the client's investment objectives. And if there is anything extra, it should be free. It should be
okay.
So that's our understanding. And finally, for EBIPs specifically, they have to ensure that the insurance cover of the recommended EBIPs is consistent with the needs and demands of the client. Yeah.
Okay. On point C, I have a suggestion. When they say of the client's investment objectives, I would prefer that they write of the client's objectives, because there's not only investment objective. If you look at an EBIP, when you have, for example, in France, you have certain specificity concerning the transmission of capital at the death of the investor, then the objective is not necessarily an investment objective. It could be an objective tied to limit the tax paid on the transmission of the capital, or something like that, or any other kind of objective. It will be the possibility to transmit the capital to somebody else outside the family, for example, and so on. There is a lot of possibilities that are offered by the life insurance product in France, and there are not investment objectives. There are some objectives of the clients, but not investment objective. So when you say when they say include in their recommendation at least one product without additional features that are not necessary to the achievement of the client's investment objectives, that means that they don't take into account those features. And those features are, in fact, in the French EBIPs at least, at the really it's the ADN of the French EBIP. It's really very important. So I would suggest that we say to the achievement of the client's objectives, and that give rise to extra cost. And in that case, I will agree. And the second point on B is always the same question. What is the definition, as you said, of the cost-efficient product? Is that we will discuss that later with the value for money. But let's say cost efficiency, is a concept that has really to be defined, because I'm not quite sure that cost efficiency is the concept that has to be promoted by, for example, by Better Finance. We have to really define that what we mean by cost efficiency before promoting it.
Okay. Cristiano, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, it was just a question. Now we're speaking about about an appropriate range of products. Before, we have always been speaking about a sufficiently wide range of products. So this is that because we are now in the best interest of the client test, which is more or less the appropriate test, and is that the reason they changed the wording?
Yes. So what we talked about before was for independent advisors. This best interest of the client is only relevant for non-independent advisors. So I think the difference in wording is related to the idea that a non-independent advisor doesn't have to, should not look at as many products as an independent one. Maybe I just show that. So my last point actually that I'm showing here is that indeed we do not have a legal definition of an appropriate range of products, and in its Q&A about the proposal, the Commission actually said that a tied agent could be theoretically assessing an appropriate range of products, which apparently was not the case. I really wish Christian Golic was here, because that's a point he raised. That apparently under MiFID previous versions, a tied agent could not be found to assess an appropriate range of products. So we really have uncertainties here in terms of what kind of intermediary can be considered as assessing as sufficient products. We really need something, a definition there that is more that is clear instead in more than guidelines probably.
We need to have an appropriate definition of what is an appropriate range of products.
Yes. Okay. So
you said something very important. I'm sorry, maybe Christian, have you finished? Yeah, you said something very important, Sebastian. You say best interest of clients test. It's only when you give non-independent advice. That's a little bit strange, because it could mean that when you are giving independent advice, you are not working necessarily in the best interest of the client. So I mean, do we have to take care on this, because it's a little bit curious, I must say.
Yeah, actually, it's unclear whether those rules also apply to independent advisors or not.
Yeah.
I think
I think it should.
It should, and it probably does. It's just that nowhere in the directive or in the proposal does it say that independent advisor also have to can take inducements, provided they act in the best interest of the client.
No, without taking inducement.
Yeah, it doesn't say. It's only
because you're starting from the point that you consider that if you are an independent advisor, you will always work in the best interest of the clients.
Yeah.
Why? What is
yeah. So yeah, actually, we could suggest adding into the definition of or in the requirements for, where was I? In those requirements, assess sufficiently large number, not accept and retain any fees, add a third point, which would be comply with the duty to act in the best interest of the client.
Yes, I think we should.
Yeah. Because for now, I think it's really the idea is we need that to contain the conflict of interest due to inducements. So we put that, but
yeah,
but advisors just silent on the independent ones, and probably should.
But you know, there are a lot of inducements that are not disclosed, and that you can never find, you can never discover. So we have to be careful also with independent advisor. They may have some cases, it may have some kind of inducement that they will receive, and nobody will know exactly what they receive.
Yeah, I think it's possible. It's just well, I think it's really no problem to make a suggestion to add that.
I think so. We should.
Okay, so yeah, we already discussed a lot of that. Otherwise, I think our thesis internally is that this is quite positive in terms of changes.
Pardon. No.
Thank you. Because, well, it forces the advisors to take cost and performance and needs of the clients as the basis for their recommendation. And it's still a band-aid because it's trying to contain the conflicts of interest, but we're generally positive. Do you have any reaction to that? Okay, then.
We agree, Sebastian.
Thank you. Then I'm moving to value for money because I'm mindful of the time. So in value for money, we have three main parts, which will be shorter than the ban on inducements. We have the question of the new definition of undue costs, the rules on product oversight and governance for MiFID and IDD, and finally, the now infamous, I think, costs and performance benchmarks to be made by ESMA and EIOPA. So let me start with undue costs. So those are amendments that are inserted to UCITS and IFMD, so for funds and fund managers. They are inserted in the same terms. Really, the amendments to UCITS and IFMD are basically the same. Just change the number of articles and the acronym. The general principle is established that fund managers should not charge undue cost. Was already an established principle, I think, at least for IEFs. Don't know for UCITS, but it would be established. Now, the proposal does not define what costs are undue. It defines when are costs to be considered due. Just taking things in reverse might be easier. So three cumulative conditions for costs to be considered due. They have to be in line with disclosures, both in prospectus and the KID, disclosed there. They have to be necessary for the fund to operate in line with its investment strategy and objective, or to fulfill regulatory requirements. So any buffer that is required by supervisors and so on. And they have to be borne by investors in a way that ensures a fair treatment of investors. So that's still a bit vague. It's not mentioned whether the delegated acts will specify more clearly or whether it will be guidelines. I expect that ESMA will definitely write guidelines to specify what is to be understood as in line with disclosures necessary and borne in a fair way. Second amendment for fund managers is to maintain, operate, and review an effective pricing process. So they will have to identify and quantify all the costs borne by the fund or its unit holders. Make a list of all the cost items with a number. They have to do that before marketing, before authorization of the fund, and throughout the fund's life, annually. And in that, the more problematic part, they have to include a comparison to the relevant ESMA cost and performance benchmark. So all the details of that are left to delegated acts, which means that we first need the time to have the directive adopted, and then ESMA to work on the delegated act, then the Commission to adopt the delegated act, and then the European Parliament and Council to say they agree before this will come into application. So we are looking at 5, 6, maybe 7 or 8 years time before this actually applies. The amendment also introduces the principle that if undue costs are identified by the pricing process, then the fund manager will have to reimburse investors. Doesn't require any action from the investors for the reimbursement. If undue costs are detected, it will normally trigger the reimbursement process. And those occurrences have to be reported to national competent authorities. So, and for the comparison to benchmarks, if there is a deviation of the cost and performance of the fund from the benchmark, then there is a prohibition for the manager to market that fund to retail investors. Doesn't exactly say what happens to existing investors in that fund, but the prohibition is to sell it to new investors or to sell more units to investors. It's unclear whether that happens, both at the creation and throughout the fund life. My understanding is that it happens, it applies for existing funds, but it doesn't explicitly say that a new fund should not be marketed after pricing process if they find a deviation to benchmark. And it doesn't say whether detecting undue costs also prevents marketing. Yeah. It would seem logical that if the initial pricing process finds undue costs, then you can't put it out on the market, but it doesn't explicitly say it. I'll let Ben in. So I'll just ask you my 2 questions and then I'll give you the floor. So what are your views on this definition of due costs? And does it work in terms of functioning of funds in your countries? Is it sufficiently detailed? And what particular elements should the legislator specify? Particular things that ESMA guidelines have to mention that will have to be looked for in terms of those due versus undue cost. And on the methods and criteria for the pricing process, are there elements that should be mentioned by the directive in its mandate to ESMA to develop the delegated act, some things that are particularly important to include in the pricing process?
Okay. I have several problems. First of all, in the cost that have to be considered as due, what about the possibility to have management fees that are partly related to the performance, that are with, okay? Are they considered as necessary for the fund to operate? I mean, when they said cost to be considered due, do they have to fulfill the 3 conditions in line with its closures necessary for the fund and borne by investor? I suppose that they have to fulfill the 3 conditions. So what about these management fees that are performance related? I have a second point concerning the relevant ESMA cost and performance benchmark concerning a fund that will be created, that is when it is before authorization. Also, I have a problem with the authorization because I think that is in some countries there is no prior authorization for launching a new fund. I think that's the case in France. If I'm not quite sure, but I think it's the case in France. You don't need to have a prior authorization. And how can you compare to a relevant ESMA benchmark when you are launching a new fund that has a specific definition, which are, and you don't know how he will exactly, what will be his performance, and what you know that what kind of cost he will bear, but you don't know the performance. So I think that you may have a problem to make that comparison. And if you have undue costs that have been identified and you have to reimburse them, then I don't understand why you could not no more market your fund to retail investors. You have been bad in the past, that's okay. You discover, or somebody discovers that there are undue costs, then you reimburse those costs, and then you start and you have a. I don't know why you cannot sell your fund to retail investors.
Yeah, so maybe answer those points. So indeed, the three conditions are cumulative. To me, a performance fee or management fee based related to performance would still comply as long as they have been indicated in the
prospectus
KID, and they can be considered necessary. That's just my thinking. They can be considered necessary for the fund to operate. If indeed the remuneration for performance is considered necessary to achieve the performance.
Okay.
You argue that it's necessary to motivate the traders to actually manage the fund properly. So I don't think there will be an issue with that. In terms of the comparison to the benchmark, so my mention of before authorization is an abuse of language. Indeed, it's before the fund is marketing for marketing.
Okay, before marketing. Okay.
Yeah, but I don't think the proposal actually says before authorization. And if it does, it will be before authorization or first launch or something like that. Comparison to the benchmark, this is an issue that will pop up also in the next slide with for retail investment products and EBIPs. So the idea is that the pricing process should also include a quantification of expected results, expected performance. So you have to make a scenario saying how much you expect this firm to yield in the, I don't know, a few years, so that you can actually compare to the benchmark.
In that case, you take the benchmark and you say that you expect to be more performing. The cost, the level of cost, you have it, and then you expect to be more performing with the same level of cost than the benchmark. It is very easy to cope with that requirement at the beginning, at least. Later, it may be different. Okay, but at the beginning, it's easy.
Yeah.
That's don't understand really these kind of things, but let's say.
And so the question for undue cost, in any case, the prohibition to market is temporary. The idea is that you stop marketing to new retail investors until you fixed the cost issue.
Okay, I understand that.
And then you can market again.
Okay, but deviation from benchmark means that you have you are on average. You have your cost are the average cost of the benchmark. Okay, so you are not more costly than the benchmark. You are just on the average.
Yeah.
But then you have for 1 year or for 6 months, you're underperforming the benchmark because you have taken, you have make a bet, you have decided that you wanted to invest, for example, in luxury shares, and it happens that China and India have decided to close the market or have a lot of problems for developing their economy. Their GDP is no more at a 6 or 7% level, but is reduced to 1%. And then the markets say, okay, we will sell all those shares, and the price of the shares is dropped by 10 or 15%, and that has an impact of your performance. But you are not willing to sell because you think that it's temporary, that in a few months the market will change his mind, and that these kind of investments will be again
there is a safety valve in this comparison to the benchmarks. The same also for EBIPS and packaged product. Is that even if you deviate, but you can still justify, still demonstrate that your cost and performance are justified and appropriate.
Or at least that they are following a strategy which is still in line with the strategy defined in the prospectus and in the KID, and that but that is only a question of tactical asset allocation. That's right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
So there is this safety valve that you can still, if you are able to demonstrate that your costs are still justified and proportionate, then you don't have to discard or stop marketing.
The cost and the performance.
The cost.
The cost. Okay.
Yeah.
It's only referred to the cost.
It refers to it's a cost and performance benchmark, but the prohibition only relates to cost. If you
okay, good.
Your comparison to the benchmark shows that your costs are too high, then you should not market your product.
Okay, I understand. And how do you define that they are too high?
That's left for delegated act.
Okay, because today, if we look in France, the supervisory authority not the AMF, but the ACPR, which is the supervisory authority for EBIPS, they have decided that you could no more propose to the customers to invest in units that for which the costs are in the 10% higher, more than 10% higher than the average cost, something like that. I don't remember exactly the definition, but let's say it means that you will have to, for example, in one product that we are that is subscribed by the association that I'm chairing. That means that they will have to suppress 5 or 10% of the total units that are proposed in the EBIP.
Yeah, so
it's already done without the delegated act.
Yeah, so I suggest we move forward because I will talk about the benchmarks and the comparisons a bit more with EBIPS and PRIPS.
Okay.
Packaged products.
And we only have 10 minutes left. 8 minutes, actually.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry. So for product oversight and governance, and we will come back to pricing, product approval process and pricing processes. So For both MiFID and IDD, the new rules on value for money introduce a product approval process, which is similar to what is being done for UCITS and IF, with some existing requirements, such as specify a target market, assess the relevant risks to the target market, and the consistency of intended distribution. So some things that are already in there, and add a bit to that, like identify the target's market objectives, what they, in your opinion, expect, and their needs, and assess your product against those expected objectives and needs. Now, specifically for retail, package retail investment products and EBIPs, there is a pricing process. It doesn't apply to the other products that are not package retail or EBIPs. It has to include a clear identification and quantification of all costs, so a list of all the cost items, just as I mentioned for UCITS and IFs. And they have to assess whether these are justified and proportionate, whether they are actually necessary, you would say, with the wording of UCITS and IF, with regard to performance. Do you need those costs to actually perform? For EBIPs only, so only in IDD, you also have to assess the risk of misunderstanding of the main features, costs, and risks. We already mentioned that EBIPs are particularly complex. So in the pricing process, there is this inclusion of the risk of a misunderstanding. We don't have that for MiFID regulated products. Should we have it? It's an open question. And then you have the comparison with the relevant ESMA or EIOPA benchmark on cost and performance, and an obligation to discard products if they deviate from the benchmark, unless you can demonstrate that those costs are still justified and proportionate. On the side of distributors, only for MiFID, the distributors have to make a regular review of the products they offer. There is no such equivalent for IDD. They are to regularly review financial instruments they offer or recommend. The IDD equivalent falls on the manufacturer to review the products they offer. Is there a need to have distributors do the same review on life insurance? Don't know. Same pricing process at the level of the distributor is introduced, with identification, quantification of distribution costs. And also, if they find any costs that is not taken into account by the manufacturer, they have to mention it, quantify it. They have to assess whether the total costs and charges, so both of the manufacturer plus distribution, are justified and proportionate. Compare those total costs to the cost and performance benchmark, so a different one for the same product by ESMA and EIOPA. And this, stop offering to their clients products that would deviate from the benchmark, again, unless we can demonstrate that blah, blah, blah. In terms of information to be provided, exchanged, manufacturers have to provide distributors all information on the financial instrument that is necessary for them to understand. So that includes the results of the product approval process. Only for IDD, there is no equivalent in MiFID. That includes also the results of the pricing process and assessment of the risk of misunderstanding. Again, open question. Should MiFID regulate investment firms also send results of the pricing process to the distributors? Is there any reason for them not to send it with the rest of the information, except for information overload for the distributor? For package retail and in the EBIPs, they have to report to the national competent authority all the details of all costs and charges, including distribution costs and third-party payments that they're making, and plus data on the characteristics of the product. Details of that are left for delegated act to specify, but it's expected to be quite a long list of details and data to be sent to the supervisor. And they have to document the result of the comparisons to benchmark and the justification for deviations and so on, and be able to provide that upon request to the NCA, but they don't have to proactively send it. On the side of distributors, they have a mirror requirement as well to the manufacturers. They have to have adequate arrangements in place to obtain the information and to understand it. That's an existing requirement, just formulated differently, but it's nothing new. Only in insurance, the distributor have to inform regularly the manufacturer about the results of their pricing process and immediately inform the manufacturer if they find costs and charges that are not fully taken into account by the manufacturer's pricing process. For both PRIIPs and EBIPs, they have to report, as manufacturers do, report to national competent authorities the details of all the costs and charges, including distribution costs and third-party payment. And they also have to document the results of the comparisons. So, questions? There is no explicit prohibition of products that include undue costs. Should that be mentioned in MiFID or in IDD POG rules? Is it necessary, considering that undue costs are supposed to be eradicated at the level of the funds? Do we need to add that also in the checks, the list of checks for packaged products? There is no requirement in MiFID to assess the risk of misunderstanding of packaged retail investment products. Should it be also required for PRIIPs and not only EBIPs? And should the documented results of the product approval process be reported proactively to competent authorities rather than upon request? Again, that would be a load of data coming the way of the national supervisors. They would probably not have a lot, could not do a lot with it in the first initially, but why not? And should these be made publicly available? So if you document the result of those comparisons, should you put them somewhere on your website? Any thoughts, any reactions to that?
Yeah, maybe just a question, actually, because I'm not as into the EBIP and the insurance issues. What is the specific definition of risk of misunderstanding? I mean, for me, it is always difficult to see the two different treatments, IDD and PRIIPs on the other side. So is that only regarding insurance issues?
It really doesn't say whether it's limited to issues regarding the insurance covers, guarantees, or the whole product. Of course, if it's if the meaning of misunderstanding is misunderstanding of the guarantees, then there is no point having that on a MiFID product because there are no. But if it's misunderstanding of the investment features, then you could add that also to the MiFID pricing process.
Okay.
No, sorry, Sebastian, you can have it also in MiFID, because if you have in MiFID some complex products, or you can have some guarantees inside UCITS and so on. So it could be cases where products are difficult to understand if in MiFID. Yeah, so that's the reason why there is a risk of misunderstanding. MiFID is not only UCITS, it could be more complex products.
Yeah. So we should ask.
But then we should also apply it to MiFID, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That was actually the main reason for my question.
No, yeah, that's should it? The answer is yes.
Okay.
Personally, could you come back to the first slide, because I think thank you. This one. The question is always what they mean by deviation from benchmark. It has to be clarified, in my view.
Yeah. Yeah. So I will
And on what horizon? Is it on short term, on medium term, on long term? There is a lot of things. It's not so easy. They seems to consider that you have cost, you have performance, you measure it every day or every week, and then you have to. But I mean. I'm just wondering whether they understand exactly what is portfolio management.
The benchmarks, I will come back to that in a second. The benchmarks are supposed to give ranges of cost and performance. So I think if you're not in the range, then you deviate. In terms of for how long, I think we come back to the same discussion we just had on funds. That if you deviate for a short time, you can still justify that there is a change in market, but you expect that to change, or you will correct, and then you can demonstrate that your costs are still justified. To me, that would be the way. But in truth, in the proposal itself, there is no precision on that. All the details are left for
delegated that. Okay. So that will be the work of Christiane. She will have a lot of things to do in the stakeholders group.
You mean at ESMA?
At ESMA. Yes, I mean at ESMA.
My mandate ends next year, so maybe I'm out of it.
Okay. Maybe you will not be anymore.
Probably have to reapply.
But I will have to leave right now. I'm sorry, but I will try to join tomorrow as well. Thank you very much. It was extremely good, Sebastian. Thank you.
You're welcome, and see you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Do we have a lot of things left, Sebastian?
No, we just have a short thing on the benchmarks actually. So maybe I do that now, and we
good idea.
Round of questions if there are. So just moving. Okay, so the cost and performance benchmarks. So the mandate that is given to ESMA and EIOPA for the respective directive is to develop and make publicly available common benchmarks for financial instruments and EBIPs. The idea is to have one benchmark per category product that, quote, presents similar levels of performance, risk, strategy, objectives, or other characteristics. Of course, you can interpret that as saying there will be one benchmark per product or only a handful of benchmarks for big product categories or anything in the middle. It doesn't say anything about that. It's open for question. And of course, for now, the industry is saying we will need a lot of benchmarks. It would be overwhelming for ESMA. Or some consumer associations, not us, are saying that only 2-3 benchmarks per country are sufficient. My thing is saying that it's probably somewhere in the middle, but we will need some fine-grained categories. The goal of the benchmarks is to help manufacturers and distributors perform the comparative assessment of cost and performance. Good. And all details are left for delegated acts. So the type of data, the data items that will need to be collected, that's for delegated acts, the methodology also, and how they are defined and published, also delegated acts. So we really don't know a lot about that. Characteristics of the benchmarks themselves, they shall display a range of cost and performance. So not just a one figure, but a range for each cost item and performance to say whether you are in or out of a benchmark. The cost should include all costs, including distribution costs, and the benchmarks should allow comparisons for individual cost components. You should be able to compare your management fees to the average management fees of the market, and so on, compare your inducements, or distribution costs at least. And specifically for IDD, the benchmark for distributors should include all distribution costs including inducements. Doesn't say anything similar for MiFID distributors. MiFID distributors theoretically do not have to include inducement as a specific cost item for the benchmark. So first big question, do you support such a system, or can you think of alternatives that would be simpler and more practical for both ESMA to put in place, for firms to use, for clients to understand? And so if we go with that system, which honestly most likely, which guidance regarding the methodologies should be included in the mandate? So for now, the mandate is develop the benchmark. Should we say develop the benchmark with that in mind? For example, should we specify how to define product categories? What kind of what level should be considered? And should the mandate to ESMA specifically mandate also specifies the need to include inducements as a cost item? Those are my three last questions. And on that, I open the floor for our last round of questions.
Sebastian, I will try to start. On first side, I would say, yeah, we should be supportive of such a system. Also, we have to say that it's a real challenge for ESMA to develop such a benchmark categorization. And it's difficult to fix the category of products because, of course, also the financial industry is very creative and inventive. They will create new product categories. So it's probably not as easy to nail everything down, but probably they have to start somewhere. So I'm supportive of this idea. And also, again, if I look at the characteristics of the benchmark and I look that only IDD includes in the distribution costs also the inducement, I think why should there be a different treatment? And yes, also in MiFID, this should be included, and just to have the level playing field again.
Okay. Ben, I see you have your hand raised.
Just to say indeed that ESMA will never develop this themselves. They will mandate some outside organization to do this because it's seriously, after 13 years at Morningstar, I can tell you that developing such a benchmark and making it accepted by the market is not an easy thing. So is it a good idea to have independent benchmarks? Yes. Is it easily done? No. Is it going to cost money anyway? Is the point.
Yeah, actually, my question about supporting this system or alternatives is because we have been looking at the value for money systems outside of the EU, like the UK, Australia, and they tend to have a system where they ask the manufacturer to specify their benchmark, and ex post, after a few years, they investigate whether performance compares to the benchmark that was heralded by the manufacturer, and if it doesn't, then they hammer it and name and shame. So and it's for the supervisor.
It sort of depends on the category you define, because certain categories are by definition how do you call that in English, a bit of everything, and therefore a suitable benchmark is a very hard thing to produce. I'm just saying I'm not against the idea, because an independent benchmark that everybody adheres to is good. But it's not an easy thing, and I don't think ESMA has the capacity to do this, so they will ask somebody like S&P or Morningstar or whoever.
Yeah, and so
I agree with Ben, and I will add the fact that if you look at the way the UK and Australia or New Zealand is doing on value for money, I mean, it's having an independent common benchmark is a good idea, but also you need to refer to your own benchmark, because in some cases the manager, he has a specific benchmark that is not necessarily will not fit into the common benchmark defined by ESMA or EIOPA. So it's not so easy to answer.
Yeah. And also we are internally a bit concerned about the length of putting in place that system, because as we mentioned already, there is adoption of the directive, then the delegated acts, the methodologies, the guidelines, gathering the data to make up those benchmarks. Probably. So in terms of in the short to medium term, the effect that this might have on value for money for retail investors is quite dubious.
I still have a problem with this value for money concept, because here it seems that we refer to cost and performance. Cost and performance are clearly part of the value for money concept. That's clear. But are they the only figures that are important? What about the fact that if you can invest in a product for a reason which is not necessarily performance, and more specifically, when you speak about performance, you have always to refer to the horizon, because the performance is very different when you have a short-term horizon or a long-term horizon. But in any case, I'm just my problem is that it seems to me that this concept came from that it comes from the capacity of people to evaluate policies in the UK. I think it was the first place where they decided to make this assessment of value for money. Is this value for money for a policy that has been decided at the state level, for example, concerning education or concerning whatever you want, or health or whatever. And as you have no way to measure what is the result of these policies, and you try to define the value for money. Is the money spent by the states
on specifically
on specific point, is it well spent or not? And so, I mean, there is no study that has been made of how we could define value for money for an investment, which is different, because when you
maybe just concretely, the way I see it in this particular setting of the proposal is that we look at the cost and performance of products that are, if you read the proposal for the benchmarks, products that share similar levels of performance, risks, strategy objectives, and other characteristics. So you should compare the cost and performance only of those products that offer similar guarantees, that invest in more or less the same kinds of assets. You wouldn't compare the cost and performance of an ETF with a life insurance product that have very strong guarantees, and that's where the definition of the product categories, as we already mentioned, is very important to make it useful.
Yeah.
You compare apples and pears.
Yeah, that's right.
Ben, you wanted to add something?
Well, I think we can support the idea, but I think I'm the same. I have the same point of view than Ben. It will be very difficult, and it will take a lot of time before they can arrive to something, if they are able to arrive to something.
Yeah, I think on that we all agree. It will be very.
So that's all.
And also, my experience with ESMA is that they like this kind of thing, but then they don't want to do it themselves anyway. And then they ask groups like the SMSG, then make a proposal. We don't have the capacity to make such a proposal.
Yeah, and it's come back to us.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I have to leave you.
Yeah.
Thank
anyway,
you very much, Sebastian. It was very well done.
You're welcome. So see you tomorrow morning, I hope.
Not tomorrow morning. Sorry.
Oh yeah, sorry. You will have the case. So tomorrow morning we see information to investors, qualification of advisors, and client categorization.
I will add to what was said
Sebastian.
earlier.
We will be there.
I will, like it was said earlier, it's a good thing that we do this because oftentimes these big packets of information pass by. I don't think we always have time to read them very thoroughly. So if you digest and reduce to the highlights, then we have a common position much more easily.
Exactly.
I think we should say thank you to Sebastian because this was excellent preparation, excellent presentation, and for us it's much easier to give our point of view, in such a webinar than answering instead the 49 pages of paper.
Sure.
So thank you very much, Sebastian.
Thank you, Sebastian.
We are
Well
trying.
See you tomorrow.
Bye. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye bye. See you.